Hello girls, I hope you're having a great day and staying safe at home. To continue with pollination and fertilization chapter, today we are going to discuss fertilization. As you all know, fertilization is the union or fusion of the nuclei of the male and female gametes. Now, remember in flowering plants, the pollen grains which is produced in the anthers, that is the male part of the flower, produces two male gametes. Remember how many? Two. Okay. And the ovule inside the ovary that is found in the pistil, which is the female part of the flower, produces the female gamete. Okay. Now, talking about the pollen grain, if you look at the diagram of pollen grain, just hold on. Okay, so this is a mature pollen grain. The mature pollen grain is a cell with double wall. The outer wall is exine. Okay, and you can see the inner wall is known as the intine. And in between the outer wall, there are gaps. The nucleus is already divided into two. One is known as the tube nuclei and the other one is known as the generative nucleus. So, it is at this stage that it is transferred to the stigma. Okay? So, further changes takes place in the pollen grain only after it falls on the stigma, but remember it must be of the same species. Okay, so next we will talk about ovule. You know that the ovule is the inner part of the ovary, and ovule after fertilization becomes the seed and the ovary becomes the fruit, and you know inside the fruit what do you find? You find the seed. So there may be a single ovule producing a single seeded fruit like mango, or many ovules producing a many seeded fruit like papaya. So each ovule has one or two protective covering which is known as the integument. So this is one and this is another integument. Okay, so the integuments leave a small opening here. You can see there is a small opening here. This is the opening below the ovule. Okay, and this opening is known as micropyle. Okay, why is this opening here? So that the pollen grains can enter through this micropyle opening. Okay, when we do fertilization, that time you will understand better. Now, enclosed by the two integument, that is, this is the outer integument and this is the inner integument. So, in between this yellow colored portion that you see is known as the nucellus. Okay, and inside the nucellus, what do you find? You find the embryo sac. Okay, so this is the embryo sac. The embryo sac contains 7 cells in all. Okay, so first you will see 3 cells at micropylar end. So this is the micropyle I told you. So here you will see 3 cells. This is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. So there are 3 cells. One, the middle one is known as the egg cell. There it is marked here. Okay, and the ones at the side is known, 1 and 3 is the synergids. Okay, so 3 cells right at the opposite. Again you go here, you'll see again 1, 2 and 3 cells. So 3 cells at opposite end, and these cells are known as antipodal cells. Okay, these 3 cells are known as antipodal cells. Then Right at the center, you will see one large cell, a central cell. The central cell contains two nuclei, which is known as the polar nuclei. It is marked here, you can see, and they are fused together. Moving on to the germination of pollen grain. Remember, children, that pollen grains germinate only if it falls on the stigma of the right plant. That means it must be of the same species, or else what will happen to the pollen grain? It will just disintegrate and disappear. Now, the pollen grain, on falling on the stigma, is stimulated to germinate. How? The stigma secretes sugar, and then the pollen grain will start germinating. Now, through a point in the pollen grain, that is the germ pore that you see here, a pollen tube starts growing out. So the pollen tube becomes long, okay? And at the tip of the pollen tube, what do you see? You see the tube nucleus and the generative nucleus. As the pollen tube becomes longer and longer, as it moves down the style towards the ovary, okay, the pollen tube becomes longer and longer, and you will see that the tube nucleus remains as it is, because it is the tube nucleus which directs the growth of the pollen tube all the way down, okay, until it reaches the ovary. And you will see that the generative nucleus will divide into two sperm nuclei, which is known as the male gamete or the male gamete nuclei. So, in a germinating pollen tube, how many nuclei do you see in all? 1, 2, and 1 tube nucleus. The pollen grain lands on the stigma, and the stigma produces sugar, which stimulates the pollen grain to germinate. So when it germinates, it grows a pollen tube which grows through the stigma. It grows through the style right down. It grows right down through the style, takes a turn here, and it reaches the ovary. First, it reaches the micropyle opening. Now, if you remember, the pollen tube has 3 nuclei, 2 sperm nuclei, and 1 tube nucleus. The tube nucleus directs the growth of the pollen tube all the way down, and once it reaches the micropyle, it will disintegrate. It will just disappear. So now what is left? 2 male nuclei, or the male gametes, are left behind. So the pollen tube enters one of the synergids. If you remember, at the micropylar end, there were 3 cells. On either sides were the synergids, and at the center is the egg cell. So the pollen tube enters one of the synergids and releases the 2 male gametes there. One of the male gametes, it will go and fuse with the egg cell at the center, forming a zygote. Okay? And the other sperm nuclei, it moves towards the 2 polar nuclei here at the center and fuses with them. Thus, 1, 2, and 3 nuclei fuse together, which is known as triple fusion. Altogether, 2 fertilizations have occurred, 1 here and 1 at the center. So it is known as double fertilization. So in double fertilization, what happens? 1 sperm nucleus fuses with the egg cell here, and the other sperm nucleus fuses with the 2 polar nuclei of the central cell. So that is known as double fertilization. Now, what happens to the different floral parts after fertilization? So after fertilization, the flower has finished its job. It has served its purpose. Means, what was the main purpose of the flower? To bring the pollen grain into the ovary. and fertilization, followed by the formation of a zygote, which will further lead to the formation of seed, and from the seed a new plant will come out. So after that, the petals, stamen, style and stigma, they wither and they generally fall off. The calyx may either fall off or sometimes it may also remain intact in dried and shriveled form. You can see in apple, guava, okay. In brinjal also, the green calyx, it remains, persists means it remains attached to the ripe fruit. Now, what happens to the ovary? It starts getting bigger, it enlarges and forms the fruit. The ovarian wall forms the fruit wall. The ovary wall may either form a dry and hard fruit wall or a fleshy fruit wall. Dry and hard, as in the case of walnuts, or a fleshy fruit wall, as in the case of apples, mangoes, and the ovules turn into the seeds. The fruit contains one or more seeds which comes from one or more ovules which is found inside the ovary, and the ovules are attached to the ovary by means of placenta. When the fruit is ripe, the seeds inside are released by different methods and then they grow into a new plant under suitable conditions. The various parts of the ovary after fertilization is shown here in this table. Ovary turns into the fruit, ovary wall turns into the pericarp or the fruit wall, ovule turns into the seed, placenta becomes the stalk of the seed, outer integument becomes the testa, inner integument becomes the tegmen, which is the seed coat. We'll be learning about it in the next chapter. Then the secondary nucleus becomes the endosperm, the egg cells and the synergids, it becomes the embryo, and the antipodal cells, it becomes disorganized, disintegrates, and then it is just disappears. So with this, we come to the end of the chapter, pollination and fertilization. So what you are supposed to do, I will let you know in our WhatsApp group. Till then, children, stay safe. God bless you.